My name is Ibrahim Traoré. I am the president of Burkina Faso, a small country in the Sahel, landlocked, yet carrying a very heavy history and a very great hope. We enter the year 2026 as many African nations do, standing between hope and hurt. Our country is young, but its roots are deep. Our people are accustomed to drought, accustomed to dust, but they are not accustomed to losing their dignity. We have lived through conflict, yet we have preserved a spirit of community. Across Africa, these contradictions repeat themselves. We speak of development, while many still go hungry. We speak of sovereignty, while decisions are made far from our own soil. We speak of faith, yet struggle to live according to what we believe. I do not speak these words as a preacher, nor do I speak as someone who always believes he is right. I speak as a human being carrying responsibility. And I understand one thing: power does not silence the conscience. It makes the conscience speak more clearly. In the final nights of the old year, after many hours of meetings and decisions that affect countless lives, my body could no longer endure. The house was quiet. The city outside was asleep. Papers were still before me. Questions without answers were still in my mind. I did not intend to sleep, but I slept. And then a dream appeared. Not chaotic, not fantastical, not frightening. It was very still, very heavy, and very real. The place where I appeared was unfamiliar, but it did not frighten me. There were no walls, no sky, no horizon. It felt like standing inside a pause in time. Time still existed, but it was not in a hurry. There was no throne, no fire, no sound of wings. When Jesus appeared, he did not come from anywhere. He was simply already there. He looked at me with the gaze of someone who already knows all your mistakes but does not need to repeat them. No halo, no overwhelming light. Only a presence that was calm and heavy. I did not kneel, I did not speak, I waited. When he spoke, his voice was very soft, but it carried responsibility, not threat or judgment. He did not ask why Africa suffers. He did not blame me for what I had not done. He did not praise what I had done. He spoke only of how people slowly lose their way, not through evil, but through small compromises with fear, pride, and convenience. He said, "The beginning of a new year matters less than how its first days are lived. Nations do not collapse because of one great decision, but because of habits that numb the conscience. Leaders rarely fall all at once, they drift." He said that the year 2026 would not be easier. There was no promise of freedom from pain. What he gave me instead was clarity. If I wished to lead without becoming what I oppose, I would have to stop and realign, not through words, not through force, but through 4 days, 4 deliberate acts. This was not a way to escape reality, but a way to face it. And before I could ask why 4 days, he said one final thing, a thing that follows me still. The greatest danger for a leader is not betrayal by others, but accepting what sounds reasonable and is quietly wrong. When I woke, the weight of the encounter did not fade. It did not press on my chest like fear. It rested there like a responsibility I could not set down. The first instruction was the simplest, and for that reason, the most difficult. 1 full day set apart for God. Not for discussion, not for debate, not for proving who believes correctly. A day without politics, without negotiation, without performance. A day of silence before God. At first, my mind resisted. I lead a nation in crisis. Silence feels irresponsible. Stillness feels like delay. Leaders are praised for action, not for pause. Yet that resistance revealed the truth. I had begun to believe that everything depends on me. That belief is the seed of corruption. In Africa, faith is everywhere. Churches overflow. Mosques call the faithful to prayer. Scripture is quoted in speeches. God is invoked at ceremonies. Yet invocation is not obedience. And visibility is not surrender. I realized how easily faith becomes a tool. A banner waved to legitimize decisions already made. A language used to calm the poor while systems remain unchanged. A shield against criticism rather than a mirror for conscience. This day was not about public worship. It was about private alignment. I imagined a nation pausing together, not to prove holiness, but to remember proportion, to remember that power is borrowed, that authority does not originate in office, that the human being is not the center of the universe. I imagined leaders sitting alone with no audience, no cameras, no advisors, just scripture, prayer, and uncomfortable honesty. Because silence does something speeches cannot. It exposes what we avoid. In silence, I hear the questions I postpone. Why do I justify compromises that would anger me if others made them? Why do I call necessity what is really convenience? Why do I believe urgency excuses erosion? Jesus did not ask for a grand display of faith. He asked for humility. And humility begins when a leader admits that intelligence is not wisdom and strategy is not morality. Africa does not lack religion, it lacks ethical consistency. I thought of how often faith has been used to divide, how easily belief becomes identity, and identity becomes weapon, how quickly devotion becomes arrogance. This day was not for asserting superiority of belief, it was for admitting dependence. There is a temptation every leader faces. It sounds reasonable. It says, if you pause, others will move ahead. If you slow down, enemies will gain ground. If you hesitate, you will lose control. But that temptation hides a deeper lie, that justice can be sustained by anxiety, that righteousness can be rushed. I have seen what happens when leaders replace prayer with urgency. They begin to measure success by speed. They begin to tolerate shortcuts. They begin to fear silence because silence brings accountability. Bureaucracy does not corrupt first. Exhaustion does. The tyrant is rarely born from cruelty. He is born from fatigue that no longer listens. On this first day, I saw the beginning of many endings. Not dramatic falls, but gradual distortions. Leaders who once meant well, who told themselves that bending once would prevent breaking later. Leaders who postponed conscience until tomorrow, and then discovered tomorrow never arrived. Jesus did not accuse, he warned. He reminded me that faith is not proven when life is stable, but when authority is restrained, that God is not honored by declarations but by limits we accept on ourselves. A day of worship is not a retreat from responsibility, it is the recalibration of it. Without God, development becomes extraction, security becomes domination, unity becomes conformity. With God removed from the center, leaders begin to believe they are necessary rather than accountable. That day is not meant to impress heaven, it is meant to correct earth. If Africa is to rise without losing its soul, it must relearn how to stop, how to listen, how to confess error without collapsing. The first act was not strategic, it was spiritual, and it demanded something rarer than intelligence. Restraint. The second day did not move forward, it moved backward. Not into nostalgia, and not into myth, but into memory. The kind of memory that corrects arrogance. Jesus told me not to forget history, but to remember it truthfully. Not as a story that flatters us and not as a weapon to shame others. As a mirror. Africa has been taught to see its past as a burden. Colonization did not only extract resources, it extracted confidence. It trained generations to believe that progress began the day others arrived, and that before that, there was only darkness. This lie still governs many decisions. On this day, I was asked to remember our ancestors not as perfect figures, but as real human beings who built systems, families, trade routes, languages, and moral codes long before modern borders existed. Communities along the Nile, the Niger, the Congo. People who understood land not as property to be exhausted, but as inheritance to be preserved. I was asked to remember that Africa did not wait to be discovered, it endured being interrupted. Then the memory moved closer. I thought of those who led our struggle for freedom, not as saints but as men and women who face choices that still confront us today. Nelson Mandela, who chose reconciliation when revenge would have been understandable, he paid a price for that choice. He was misunderstood by both sides, but he understood something rare, that humiliation does not heal humiliation. Kwame Nkrumah, who dreamed of a united Africa when fragmentation was more convenient, his vision frightened those who profited from division. He was removed not because his dream was impossible, but because it was dangerous to existing interests. Thomas Sankara, my own countryman, who said that independence cannot be borrowed, that debt can become a leash, that dignity has a cost. He was not killed because he failed, but because he refused to compromise in ways that would have made him useful to others. Julius Nyerere, who placed human dignity above profit, even when it slowed growth. He believed that development without humanity is not progress, it is rearranged inequality. This day was not about glorifying leaders. Jesus warned me against that. He said when we turn men into icons, we stop learning from their mistakes. We turn history into a shrine instead of a teacher. The point of remembrance is not pride, it is direction. A people who forget where they come from will borrow futures that do not fit them. They will imitate systems that do not serve them. They will accept solutions that require their silence. There is a temptation here, and it is subtle. It says, the past is complicated, so ignore it. Focus on efficiency, focus on modernity, focus on what works elsewhere. This sounds reasonable. It is also how cultures disappear. When leaders cut themselves off from ancestral memory, they become easy to manage. They lose reference points that might challenge imported logic. They begin to measure success only in numbers that do not count suffering. I felt the weight of this warning personally. How often have I spoken of reform without asking whether it honors our history? How often have I accepted frameworks that promised speed but demanded surrender of agency? How often have I dismissed elders as outdated because their wisdom was not written in reports? The tyrant does not reject history openly. He reinterprets it selectively. He keeps the parts that justify his authority and erases the parts that demand humility. Remembering ancestors is not a ceremonial act. It is a political safeguard. It reminds leaders that they are temporary, that their power sits on foundations they did not build, that betrayal of the people is betrayal of lineage. Jesus did not ask me to defend every tradition. He asked me to listen before discarding, to honor before revising, to remember that a nation without memory becomes a project, not a people. This second day taught me that the future does not begin where the past ends. It begins where the past is understood, and that forgetting is not neutral. It is a choice. Jesus told me that on the second day of the year 2026, what I must do is this. On this day, I was asked to remember my ancestors not as perfect figures, but as real human beings, people who built systems, families, trade routes, languages, and moral codes long before modern borders existed. Communities along the Nile River, the Niger River, the Congo River, people who understood land not as property to be exhausted, but as an inheritance to be preserved. I was reminded that Africa did not wait to be discovered. Africa endured being interrupted. Then memory moved closer. I thought of those who led our struggle for freedom, not as saints, but as men and women who faced choices that still confront us today. Nelson Mandela, who chose reconciliation when revenge would have been understandable, he paid a price for that choice. He was misunderstood by both sides, but he understood something rare. Humiliation does not heal humiliation. Kwame Nkrumah, who dreamed of a united Africa when fragmentation was more convenient, his vision frightened those who profited from division. He was removed not because his dream was impossible, but because it was dangerous to existing interests. Thomas Sankara, my own countryman, who said that independence cannot be borrowed, that debt can become a leash, that dignity has a cost. He was not killed because he failed, but because he refused to compromise in ways that would have made him useful to others. Julius Nyerere, who placed human dignity above profit, even when it slowed growth. He believed that development without humanity is not progress, it is merely rearranged inequality. This day was not meant to glorify leaders. Jesus warned me against that. He said that when we turn men into symbols, we stop learning from their mistakes. We turn history into a shrine instead of a teacher. The purpose of remembrance is not pride, it is direction. A people who forget where they come from will borrow futures that do not fit them. They will imitate systems that do not serve them. They will accept solutions that require their silence. There is a temptation here, and it is subtle. It says that the past is complicated, so ignore it. Focus on efficiency, focus on modernity, focus on what works elsewhere. It sounds reasonable, and that is exactly how cultures disappear. When leaders cut themselves off from ancestral memory, they become easy to manage. They lose reference points that might challenge imported logic. They begin to measure success only by numbers that do not account for suffering. I felt this warning personally. How many times have I spoken of reform without asking whether it honors our history? How many times have I accepted frameworks that promised speed but demanded the surrender of agency? How many times have I dismissed elders because their wisdom was not written in reports? The tyrant does not openly reject history, he interprets it selectively. He keeps the parts that justify his authority and erases the parts that demand humility. Remembering ancestors is not a ceremonial act. It is a political safeguard. It reminds leaders that they are temporary, that their power rests on foundations they did not build. That betrayal of the people is betrayal of lineage. Jesus did not ask me to defend every tradition. He asked me to listen before discarding, to honor before revising, and to remember that a nation without memory becomes a project, not a people. This second day taught me that the future does not begin where the past ends. It begins where the past is understood, and forgetting is not neutral. It is a choice. The third day turned my attention back to the world of decisions, contracts, and consequences. Jesus did not tell me to pray for miracles. He told me to ask for blessing on work. That distinction mattered. A miracle removes responsibility. A blessing demands it. He said that a nation's projects are never neutral. Roads carry more than vehicles. Ports carry more than goods. Mines carry more than minerals. Every agreement carries values, whether spoken or hidden. In Africa, we have learned to speak the language of development fluently. We discuss infrastructure, growth, investment, and competitiveness. These words are not wrong, but words can anesthetize if they are not examined. On this day, I was asked to bring every national ambition into the light of conscience. I I was asked to pray not for success, but for wisdom for those who sign agreements, integrity for those who manage public funds, fairness for those who design development plans. I was asked to admit something uncomfortable, that not all harm comes from bad intentions. Much harm comes from logical arguments that ignore human cost. I have heard them myself. We must accept this deal because we have no alternative. We must tolerate this injustice temporarily for long-term growth. We must centralize power to ensure stability. We must silence dissent to protect unity. Each argument sounds reasonable. Each has been used by men who believed they were saving their nations. Each has produced suffering that outlived their terms in office. The danger is not that leaders desire exploitation. The danger is that they redefine it. Jesus warned me that development without God does not become neutral. It becomes predatory. It measures success in output, not in dignity. It celebrates growth while communities disappear. I thought of mineral contracts signed far from the villages they affect, of ports that enrich a few while fishermen lose access to the sea, of highways that connect markets but bypass communities, of statistics that rise while hope falls. This day forced me to confront my own temptations. The temptation to believe that speed justifies opacity, the temptation to believe that expertise excuses exclusion, the temptation to believe that good intentions cancel outcomes. I saw a future that could unfold quietly, a future where security projects expand and freedoms narrow, where economic zones flourish and labor protections weaken, where stability is praised and accountability is postponed. In that future, the leader does not declare himself a tyrant. He insists he is being realistic. He says the people are not ready. He says later will be better. Later becomes never. Jesus said something that unsettled me deeply, that the most dangerous form of injustice is the one that presents itself as unavoidable. He said that when leaders stop asking whether growth is just, they eventually stop caring whether it is real. Numbers can be adjusted, reports can be written, reality cannot. This third day was a confession. I admitted that I do not know all outcomes, that I cannot control every consequence, that some projects will fail despite best efforts, that some choices will haunt me. But I also admitted something else. That refusing to ask for God's blessing on our work is itself a decision. It is the decision to trust only our calculations, and calculations do not weep. In the Sahel, work is not abstract, it is survival. A failed project is not an inconvenience, it is hunger. A corrupt contract is not a scandal, it is migration. A mismanaged budget is not a statistic. It is a generation delayed. I was reminded that God is not interested in efficiency detached from justice, that blessing does not rest on projects that require blindness, that no nation becomes strong by normalizing harm. Power seeks permanence, justice accepts limits. This day did not ask me to abandon ambition, it asked me to anchor it. To remember that leadership is not proven by how much is built, but by how many are protected. That legacy is not measured in monuments, but in whether people are safer after you leave than before you arrived. I asked Jesus for wisdom not to confuse necessity with fear, for courage not to trade integrity for applause, for clarity to see long-term consequences beyond immediate praise. He did not promise that this path would be rewarded quickly. He warned that it would often be lonely, but he said something that remains with me, that a nation can survive poverty longer than it can survive injustice dressed as progress. This third day did not give me confidence, it gave me sobriety, and that, I now understand, is a form of grace. The fourth day was the hardest, not because it required effort, but because it removed distance. Jesus told me not to remain in prayer halls or offices. He told me to go and find him outside, and I understood immediately where he meant. He was not in buildings designed to honor him. He was in places designed to forget people. This day was not symbolic. It was physical. It required movement into discomfort. I saw refugee camps where time no longer moves forward, only in circles. Families from Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, waiting not for opportunity, but for stability that never arrives. Children learning patience before they learn hope. I saw drought-scarred land across the Sahel, in Niger and Chad, where the earth itself looks exhausted. Where farmers read the sky like scripture, searching for mercy. Where hunger does not announce itself loudly, it settles quietly. I saw urban slums in Lagos, Nairobi, Kinshasa, places full of life and creativity, yet treated as invisible. People working endlessly, yet described as unemployed. Communities described as problems rather than as people. I saw villages without clean water in Ethiopia and Mozambique. Places where women carry the weight of survival daily and children grow familiar with illness long before they understand its cause. Jesus did not ask me to fix everything in one day. He asked me to see. Not to visit as a benefactor, not to arrive with cameras, not to distribute words that sound like solutions, but to listen, to sit, to touch hands, to look into eyes without needing to explain why things are the way they are. Because explanation is often a way to escape responsibility. There is a temptation leaders face when confronting poverty. It says this is too big, structural, historical, global. It tells us that individual encounters change nothing. This sounds logical. It is also how indifference becomes policy. When leaders stop seeing faces, they start managing categories. The poor become statistics, refugees become flows, slums become zones, hunger becomes an indicator. Once people become abstractions, harm becomes easier. Jesus warned me that this is where conscience dies. He said that every society is judged not by its ideals, but by who it steps over to achieve them. That poverty is not only an economic condition, it is a moral accusation. I felt that accusation personally. How many times have I spoken of long-term plans while people lived in permanent urgency? How often have I approved programs without asking who would wait longest for their benefits? How easily have I accepted the language of limitation when it came to the vulnerable, and the language of urgency when it came to power? The danger here is not cruelty, it is insulation. The tyrant does not begin by hating the poor, he begins by no longer encountering them. On this fourth day, Jesus did not speak much. He did not need to. The presence of the forgotten was enough. I understood that charity without proximity becomes performance, that policy without listening becomes control, that leadership without contact becomes fiction. This day was not about guilt, it was about rehumanization. To remember that every poor person is not a problem to be solved, but a life to be honored. That development which does not reach the last is not delayed, it is defective. I was reminded that the measure of leadership is not how high one rises, but how low one is willing to go without losing respect for those already there. This fourth day did not end with answers, it ended with a question that remains open. Who is missing from the room when decisions are made, and why? When the 4 days ended, nothing around me had changed. The same problems waited. The same pressures returned. The same expectations pressed in from every direction. What had changed was not the world. It was the way I could no longer pretend not to see it. Jesus did not promise that 2026 would be gentle. He did not offer protection from failure, betrayal, or misunderstanding. He offered something more demanding: awareness. He showed me that leadership is not tested in moments of applause, but in the quiet hours when compromise presents itself as wisdom, when fear dresses itself as realism, when injustice asks to be tolerated just a little longer. I speak now to Muslims and Christians, to believers and skeptics, to leaders of the Sahel, and to listeners across the world, especially those who have lived long enough to recognize patterns. Faith, in its truest form, is not about winning arguments. It is about accepting limits. It is about remembering that no office absolves us from moral responsibility, that no cause is pure enough to excuse cruelty, that no future is bright enough to justify forgetting the present. Africa does not need saviors, it needs servants who refuse to become masters over their own people. The world does not need louder leaders, it needs quieter consciences. I do not stand before you claiming success. I do not claim purity. I do not claim to have resolved the contradictions of power and justice. I claim only this, that I have been warned. Warned that tyranny is rarely announced. It is assembled slowly, from rational decisions made without humility. Warned that the greatest danger is not opposition but agreement with what feels reasonable and is quietly wrong. I have learned that power does not corrupt all at once. It exhausts first, it isolates, it convinces leaders that they must carry burdens alone and that consultation is weakness. From there, it is a short distance to silence dissent, to justify force, to confuse order with peace. I speak also to those who watch leaders from afar, who feel disappointment, anger, or cynicism. Do not surrender your moral expectations. When people stop expecting integrity, leaders stop attempting it. Hold us accountable, not with hatred, but with clarity. To my fellow leaders, especially in Africa, I say this: remember where you came from, remember who paid the price for the seat you occupy, remember that history is watching, even when the cameras are not. To the faithful I say, do not use God to defend what your conscience knows is wrong. Faith that cannot challenge power has already been absorbed by it. To the poor and the forgotten I say, your lives are not footnotes to progress, you are the measure of it. These 4 days were not rituals, they were choices. And choices do not end when ceremonies do. Every morning I return to the same tension. between what is possible and what is right, between what is urgent and what is just, between what preserves power and what preserves dignity. I do not know how history will judge my actions, but I know how I must judge them now. Each day, leadership offers me excuses. Each day, conscience offers me questions. And each day, I must decide which voice will guide me. If these reflections resonate with you, not as ideology but as examination, then stay with this conversation, reflect, respond, speak, share your own questions. Quiet reflection grows stronger when it is not carried alone. Each day I wake up and must choose again. There is no final victory, only wakefulness or surrender. May the year ahead bring not only change but meaning, not only growth but justice, not only faith spoken but faith lived. And may we all choose, again and again, to remain awake.